In Parliament today, we are talking about how we are embracing our culture and our heritage.
But not everyone feels a connection with their culture and heritage. Many people do, but some people don't. What is it about cultural heritage that draws these people to this identity? Some may think traditions are archaic and no longer relevant. They are unnecessary during these modern times. Perhaps for some they aren't, but for others, like us, we try to explore heritage with a variety of how beneficial it is for us. I think growing up, I never questioned my cultural identity. I embraced a heritage. I embraced a religion. I embraced my my identity. I think was over the period of time, but in all of this, I've equally learned the differences between what culture is, what identity is, and what heritage is, because my parents used to, or grandparents used to often say, they said we must do this. They said, I'm like, who are these they people?
They.
You know what I mean? Now and it's the ancestors and it's our future generations. I know that, Lynn, you and I are women of color in a continent, an African continent, where we are a rainbow nation. Do you think that you have battled with your culture and heritage?
Only recently, growing up, it was, as you say, it was, what am I? I'm colored, and I accepted that. Religion, I'm Christian, and I accepted that. And it was never something that bothered me. And only until probably a couple of years back, and it came with my sister feeling very challenged with what she believed her heritage and her culture was. And we have these conversations all the time, and it's sparked some questions in myself. Do I still identify purely as colored and Christian? For instance, my sister has, she always speaks about it, and she says, I don't like the idea of being labeled colored.
Because you can't call yourself colored in the USA.
Exactly, something like that. And
Yeah.
she actually mentioned that. Personally, now on the other side of the spectrum, I have never battled with, it's not a battle for me to think of myself as colored. But now what I battle with is, what does that mean for me? And how do I see myself in, as you say, Africa, South Africa? I feel like I have adopted so many aspects of different cultures and heritage within our country and the continent that I can probably just comfortably now say that I am African or I'm South African. So colored for me almost becomes a subcategory of what I see myself as part of the bigger as being African or South African.
I think for me, questions of heritage and identity is not straightforward as it appears, right? Like for you, of course, colored is because there was I would think like a biracial initially kind of thing, and that's where that came from. So imagine it's not straightforward for me because now.
Because I thought you were Indian to start off with.
Exactly. And then when it's Indian, what kind of Indian are you? And I'm not 100% Indian.
Yes.
So yes, there was a ship that might have come to South Africa with whomever it was, but for me, my grandfather was from Afghanistan, so there is the Arab part of it, and this is my dad's father. So there is the fact that where we came from, where our ancestors or future generations came from, there was a borderless society at that time. India, Pakistan, Kashmir, Afghanistan. It was like a borderless society. So I can't fix myself as where I actually am.
Completely fit
in.
And it's not a boxy situation.
And sometimes I think I didn't want to be Indian. So over the years, I didn't want to be Indian because I
Why
felt.
not? Why didn't you want to be Indian?
Because I felt that, Indians are from India and I am African.
Yeah.
And for me, it is like my identity was I am an African Muslim, and then now, of course, because it's a box, it's an Indian.
Yeah.
But I really never saw myself as Indian because we never practiced the the heritage or
Mm.
the culture
Mm.
of Indianism in South
Mm.
Africa, but we practice a religion, a belief
Mm.
system.
Mm.
And that for me is what I have taken um, f- personally, and I've taken that forward. And that has been my true north. So, uh, so for me, other people would do maybe customary things and beliefs and decorations and other things that I don't identify with. I
Mm.
mean, including, I would think, extended family. But I think when I grew up, I was very clear. This is who I am. And I didn't. So yes, my mom spoke to us in Urdu because that was the vernac at that time, um, and but further to that, we practiced nothing else,
Mm.
right? We just practiced being Muslim. And over the years, of course, being born in South Africa, being African, I saw myself as African. So when I go, like I mean, last week, I was at BRICS last week, and of course, India was there, and then people would say, "Oh, are you from India?" I took offense to that, and I'm
Mm.
like, "No, I'm African because my soul is African, and I feel the most comfortable being in Africa.
Yeah.
Yes, I am a child of the world, but I am so African because I
Mm.
understand that where you are, Africa is in me.
Mm. Now, when you say soul, what speaks to my soul? Now, the battles for me as a colored woman, right, is that that's all I've known all my life. I understood from the beginning that I was colored. That's how we grew up. We, our home language was never English, it's Afrikaans. Now, I battle even when we talk about and I'm talking now from my own. This is me. I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody else. This is my feelings about this. When this talks about, doing away with Afrikaans as a language, for instance, for me, that is the sole point
Mm-hmm,
because I don't, that is my mother tongue.
mm-hmm,
So it is not an, yes, and people will say this is, it's an oppressive language and it's all of that. And I understand all of that. But when I take it back to me and what's in my heart, I grew up with that. That's what
mm-hmm,
I know. Now, whether it was imposed on
mm-hmm,
me or where it came from, the bottom line is that is what is in my heart. That is what speaks to my soul. So I, it, Afrikaans for me is a part and parcel of who I am.
mm-hmm,
So that is my heritage.
mm-hmm. And I think for me is when we talk about the world today, um, I think sometimes culture and traditions have kind of destroyed because I feel it's very much man-made.
Exactly.
And when people say that we've watered down or we've forgotten our traditions altogether, and I say, but who said that that was the right thing to do? So I question traditions.
Yeah.
I don't question religion because I know that I am governed by a book,
Mm.
but I question traditions. And I'm like, did you get up one day and saw the moon and you decided, oh well? And I think for me it was when I was pregnant with my eldest daughter, and she was born with something called a Neckel's diverticulum, which was her intestines were on the outside, and
Mm.
instead of people that came to visit me, because of course she was the first grandchild, instead of people coming when they came to visit me because she was still in the hospital, and seeing if I'm okay, the first thing the traditional aunties would say is, "Did you hold a knife when there was a lunar eclipse?"
Or there's a curse on your family or
I am
something like
like,
that.
what has that got to do
Mm.
with
A
anything that's a
medically,
do you understand
scientifically
what I'm saying?
explainable
So
situation.
I've always questioned traditions. I always
Mm.
felt that traditions are man-made. And yes, people will come at us and people will say those things. And I have always questioned. And I'm also very grateful that I had a dad and a mother that did not grow us,
Enforce.
enforce that with us. So yes, when people talk about traditions, and it was we have forgotten our traditions, I think we have to look at what makes sense and what doesn't. For me, the book makes sense, and I will keep going back to the Quran and see what works for me. But don't come there and say I need to slaughter a cow because there's bad luck helping
What if you're a
happen.
vegetarian?
Exactly. Exactly. Slaughter cow because I'm having a lot of bad luck, as they seem, because that again is something that, a traditional thing. So you need to cut a cow. And I'm like, what is the cow cutting to do with that? So I think even there's a lot of that thing a lot of those things that I question. And I think it's really a choice that we have. And most importantly, what is our value system, more importantly, from our culture and our heritage, that we need to either break the generation of what didn't work, and how can we create a better culture for our children and our grandchildren and the future generations.
Which is also important because now we need to also realize, and which is a fact, that our grandchildren, I mean, if you look at your family and my family, let's start with my family. My granddaughter finds herself in a situation where she has a Zulu mom, a colored dad, a grandmother that's kind of not enforcing any of traditions. Well, firstly, I don't even know what the actual traditions are that I'm supposed to subscribe to. So the only thing that is my compass is the values, like you said, that my parents instilled on me.
So on Heritage Day, as an example, what would Cairo wear?
Well, at the moment, we are going between 1 year we'll do Zulu culture, and the next year we'll do something that is maybe South African. So, on the colored side, I don't feel like there's something specific that I can do because colored have taken from so many different
Yeah, because you
cultures.
get colored Muslims, you get like a.
Yes,
So I think
exactly.
it's where we now, because my son is biracial, it's how do we start to embrace cultural fusion. And I think that's the
That's the
most important
thing.
thing, because I've also learned over the years is that you can't ignore the one culture. You can't ignore the one
And that is
heritage,
what we are
because
very specific
and
about.
that's what we do in
Yes.
society at the moment, because we want to identify only with the one that's the appears to be more awakened or woke or whatever the
Or where
term
there's
is.
actual things that we can
Yes.
pinpoint. These are traditions
Like,
and
and
cultures.
I remember once my son said to me, and he might have been 10 years old, and there was this penny sparrow thing at that
Yes.
time, and it was, we were like, oh, these white people and these white people and these white people. And I remember that he was 10 years old, and he said to me, I really feel sad when you guys talk about white people like that,
Because
because
my
my dad is white, and my
exactly.
grandma and my Oma and Opa is saying, and it clearly took a 10-year-old to like, oh my word, if I say this, I have to be very conscious to not say it in front of him, because yet he should know about
Yeah.
the atrocities of what has happened.
Yes.
But I think that was just something I took me, you know, to learn that we should not to just it's not we shouldn't be like it shouldn't be a blanket
Yeah.
conversation that's had about just white people or black people or Indian people or colored
Yeah.
people. And I think that for me is how important it is to um, express certain things, and how do we teach our children to build character, and what is the heritage we're going to leave them. Doesn't have to be about possibly a dress, possibly food, because I think that's what we heritage is all about. It's about what we look
What we
like,
eat, what
what
we
we
wear,
eating, and
what
does
we
that.
yeah.
But isn't heritage the most important thing is to be a good, kind human being?
Exactly. And that comes back to the value. So for me, it is about my grandchildren embracing something that they, give them the choice of saying, what do I want to take on board? And what am I not happy with? What am I questioning?
Yeah.
And what am I willing to carry with me?
Because
But and instead of trying to enforce just because we believed it had to be or our parents,
we didn't contest it.
we didn't
So
contest them.
so
So
I
why are they not allowed to
so our
contest it?
generation, so for me, is what is our gift to our future generation when it comes to heritage? I mean, people are like, is it property, is it this, is it that? Our gift to our generation, our rich gift to our generation is to really to enhance their lives in a good way that we think or we desire for
for
them.
them.
And it's always about the goodness of
Yeah.
humanity, because I think back in the days we were all separated. When it
Mm,
came, it was easy for us to have our cultures
mm,
because we were separated. Now
mm.
all of a sudden it's a combine, it's a rainbow world. We all are
Absolutely.
combined. We have, but how, what are we learning? We are learning tolerance, we are learning
Tolerance is the good
understanding
word.
from each other when it comes to each other's culture, so we also don't judge each other.
Yes. So and that's important. So when I speak to Cairo, for instance, because Cairo is 8 years old now, but I tell you the things that I learned from her. So because she finds herself, for instance, now this is important to be aware of and take cognizance of, because firstly she's a girl child, secondly she comes from, you know, different cultural backgrounds, and then she also now has a very different family structure. Now there's no way you can bring what you have
Hmm.
and impose that on her,
Hmm.
because it's completely confusing. So she'll say, I'm a Zulu colored.
Hmm.
Or she'll say, you know, she stays with her mom, for instance, for 1 week, and with me for 1 week. And that's how it's been when dad was around. And then it's a different setup. So we'll speak about amagwinya, you know, the
Hmm.
fat
Hmm.
cook. She'll call it at my house. She'll say, Clammy, can you get me amagwinya? And
Hmm.
then she says, oh, fat cook,
Hmm.
you
Oh
know,
yeah,
stuff like
yeah.
that. So I try and teach her the different, and there's no forcefulness
Hmm.
about it.
Hmm.
There's no, in this house, you will only
Hmm.
name it this or that or the other. And to learn from that, she will also say, for instance, I would say, you know, it's my week. So she's with me for a week, and she'll say, I'll say, do you want to go home? Or she'll tell her mom, or her mom will say, you know, you want to go to Glammy, and she'll say, no, you must respect your week. It's your week.
Mm, exactly.
So and you know what that is, from allowing them
To
to
be, but I
to
think
be.
it goes to the fact that cultural heritage gives you a sense of belonging.
Yes.
And I think that's also where we as a society want to belong to something.
Yes.
So it's how do we balance
Yes. Yes.
this belonging
And not
of,
force it to be belonging there, because
yeah,
they don't just belong in one place now. Our
yes,
children belong in different spaces, and they need to be able to operate in those different spaces and bring it together and start their own new system of values and culturally what works for them.
yeah.
So if Cairo decides one day she, you know, she doesn't necessarily want to do a or follow a specific tradition on either side,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
what are we doing with that?
And I think for me, that's why I know that I always say that tradition is man-made, and but I also believe that people box you.
Mm.
So if I walk around, people would just assume that I'm Indian.
Yeah.
So they would like say, "Oh, happy Diwali," and I'm
Yeah.
like, "But with and you're
I
like,
thought about that,
but you've just wished me happy Eid the other day, and now you wish me happy
because they
Diwali."
don't even understand the
Because they're
difference.
not aware. And I think for us, for me, it's how
Mm.
do we get people to be culturally aware
Yes.
of the differences that we have
Mm.
in our society,
Mm.
because we are such an integrated
Yeah.
society. Because I think even some people, some white people would think that everybody's a Zulu.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, actually,
Yeah.
I'm Xhosa or I'm Sutu, or like,
And there's a difference.
and do not, and you don't want them to be offended about it,
Yeah.
because I think it's we need to consciously make ourselves aware of the different types of
Mm.
cultures, the heritage that people have, especially in a country like South Africa or in a continent.
Yeah.
But globally, for me, if I look at like South Africans, and I look at when we go to the UK, the Muslims or the Indians, they might be four generations of coming from Pakistan and India and the Middle East, but their parents, they speak the language, they are
They
culturally active,
entrenched.
they're entrenched, so yet they're in the Western society. And now in South Africa, we are kind of, well, we don't know, where do we fit
In
in?
Afrikaans, they say a mengelmoes.
Okay, we're a mengelmoes then. Well, we're a bunny chow.
We're a bunny
We're
chow.
a bunny
We
chow.
can, you see, we can put our own labels
We
and
could
our own
just,
new
yes.
things.
And I think that's the thing, is I think culture, it's really about the food we eat,
Mm.
what we dress.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be about anything else. It's
Mm.
like, for me, traditions is man-made, but culture is important
Mm.
because we all want to be cultured in
Yes.
some kind of way. And I think it is when I talk about how I can cook, Indian food,
Mm.
or Middle Eastern food.
Mm.
It comes from me having a sense of belonging because I make a mean curry or I make a mean biryani,
Mm.
and it's also a sense of pride. I think so.
Absolutely.
I also I'm conflicted with traditions, culture. It's something I adopt, but I
Mm.
can easily be a Zulu girl. I'm from Richmond.
Hmm.
I can easily be a Zulu girl. I've been brought up with with Zulus. They call me Ketiwe. So for me, I can easily be a Zulu girl from,
On the day, if that is what you're required to be.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
But isn't that then what we're saying? We there's a South Africanness about us, which is a new way of looking at culture for us. For there could be the elements, but there are so many different elements we're pulling from different um, cultural exposures that we're experiencing.
And I think what apartheid has taught us, the segregation and that the divide, and all of a sudden we have multiple, diverse, dynamic. We are so proud to be called ourselves South African. I think that is a culture, whether we're black, white, Indian,
Yeah.
colored, Chinese, that is a culture we need to adopt. The
Yes,
South African
that is what
culture,
I'm
the
saying.
spirit of Ubuntu.
Mm.
And I think for me, if I can leave any legacy for my family, is yes, respect your religion because that's what you want to adopt
Yes.
if you're keen to do that, but just be proud of having a South African
African
culture.
culture.
And I think it's like on Heritage Day, when we have Heritage Day, I also don't like it to be called a Braai Day
Yeah.
because I'm thinking,
It's
but you're exposing my bunny chows and my
exactly.
biryani,
Yeah.
you know. And that's what the Heritage Day
Yeah.
is important, I
Mm.
would assume, at schools, for other kids to understand there are different
Yeah.
kinds of
Or to
heritage.
find something that is
Well, can connect
that
us.
can connect us, can pull us together. And I guess that's why Braai Day came about, because that kind of is something that we all do.
No,
In South, you don't braai?
I don't like to braai. It's not something I grew
What
up
kind of South
braaiing.
African are you?
I can cook a biryani outside.
On the fire?
Yes, I can do a pot of biryani outside on the fire.
Yo.
So it's
Yo.
is that still a
You
braai?
see that South African yo?
Yo. And I think again, language. I mean, we have
Mm,
our own language in South Africa,
exactly.
kind of thing. It's really important for us to be. We have our own lingo.
Mm,
We have a fusion of food these
mm.
days. And a fusion of food. So I think for me, what is important is when we question our cultural identity, it's from the past.
Yeah.
How do we say we are here now? How do we teach our children or the future generation of these were the things that were there before? It was different because there were different tribes. Now the tribes integrated.
So this is where I'm standing on it. I think it's important for them to understand. So we need to tell them, they need to understand the background, the history of where they come from. I mean, in my case, it's difficult because I try to look back and you always end at the slaves, like then the slaves' name change and now like, you don't even know what your great grandfather's name was. But anyway, so you go with what they.
But does it matter so much?
So for me, but you see, this is the thing. For me, it doesn't matter. For my sister, it does. And
Ah,
so that's
so for
the
me it
thing.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I live
So for me,
now,
yeah. So for
going to die
me,
tomorrow.
yeah. For me, it doesn't matter, but for certain people, it does. And I think you can't. You see, we can't judge people, and we
Yeah.
can't take it away. I think everybody's allowed to feel the way they feel, but the bottom line is for me when it comes to, and I'll speak about my granddaughter because that's where we're going forward with, or what we're going forward with, grandchildren. I think it's important that they understand the background and up to where you can explain it to them.
Mm.
But then it's about respecting what they then choose to do.
Mm.
Now, if my granddaughter decides when she's 16, I actually identify more as a Zulu girl. That's what I want to do. That's why I feel more comfortable. I don't want the rest of this. I'm going to have to be big enough to say, that's your choice.
Mm. But as long as she's aware that she's made up of two.
Yes.
And I think for me, that's what I was ensuring that my son that he's made up of two. But was a learning that I had to do,
Mm.
because I wanted to kind of own him, for a long time. And now all of a sudden, when he eats with his hands, I'm like, don't you want a fork and knife? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Can the
Yeah.
white boy in you come out a little bit,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I think for me it's important. But growing up, I had a huge battle with embracing the culture,
Mm.
because now it's different.
Mm.
Before, it was really, it was, society was in a box. We were
Yeah.
all contained in
Mm.
different communities. And I just felt that I wasn't part of that belonging.
Mm.
And I think I've always been a rebel, so that was easy for
Yeah.
me. But again, when I was growing up, people would like say to me things like, are you Hindu? And I'm like,
Mm.
what does that mean?
Mm.
Because I'm Indian. It doesn't mean I'm Hindu.
Mm.
You know, it was like, that was what they, because the way I looked, I might not have been fair skinned like some Muslim girls, so they would just assume that I was Hindu. And I'm
Mm.
like, but what is that?
Yeah.
I mean, so I think for me is, I've always struggled with the traditions.
Yeah.
I have understood my culture,
Mm-hmm.
because it's also, I have a diverse culture. I have an Arab culture. So, say as an example, being Muslim, I'm not supposed to have a tattoo,
Mm.
which I do have. And then, if
Oh,
yeah,
where is it?
I do have a tattoo, and
Where is it?
it's on my shoulder in the back.
Okay.
But and then so but if you go to Afghanistan, which when my cousin went there, some of our cousins have tattoos. So yes, Islamically, it's shown that you shouldn't have a tattoo.
Mm.
But from a culture perspective, they've had tattoos. And I'm like, well, all of us have
Yeah.
tattoos. I just realized my mom doesn't know I have a tattoo.
You're gonna be in trouble.
But it's again, it's
Mm.
like, so yes, they are Muslim, but they've
Mm.
had tattoos. I guess that's the part of the culture.
Mm.
And I've been to India twice. I don't resonate when I arrive in India. They don't see me as Indian. I don't have a sense of belonging there, because they look at me. They were like, "Are you Brazilian? Are you
Yeah.
whatever?" And I'm like, "Okay, whatever."
Mm.
So wherever you go, people just assume or judge who
Yeah.
you are.
People always think I'm Hispanic when I go
To the
to
US,
the US. Yeah.
Now, of course, with my gray hair, people can't even put me in a box. If I go to the UAE, it's like, are you an Emirati or whatever it is? So wherever, people will make up what they
What they
think you are.
think you are.
And that's okay. Before, I would get a bit defensive about who I
Yeah.
would want to know.
Yeah. But now you
Now,
know who you are.
now I know who I
Yeah.
am. And I know that I want to be a good human,
Yeah.
and I am so proud being African.
Yeah.
I went to the New Orleans Film Festival, and every day I just wore things that are African, because
Mm.
I didn't want them to think I was anything else.
But now that's another interesting point you're making, because when you travel, and this is something I love. When you travel, I can remember being in Dubai actually at the airport, and there was a group of South Africans, Afrikaner South Africans at the airport. And then all of a sudden, nothing else matters. All that matters is that you're all from South Africa.
Exactly.
And isn't that what we should embrace?
And I think we all play an integral part of this diverse culture,
Mm.
this global diverse
Mm.
culture. We have rich cuisines, we have rich cultural practices, we have political activism, we have sporting
Yeah.
triumphs,
Music.
and music. And for me, that is an important part
Mm.
of a society.
Of a society.
That makes us great humans.
Yeah.
That makes us being better together.
So at the end of the day, it's about tolerance and accepting each
Mm.
other for who we decide we want to be or what we are.
Respecting.
Respect, but tolerance creates unity.
Mhm.
That's my ending point.
So we agree, questions of heritage and culture are not as straightforward as it might appear. So perhaps the first and best place to address these topics is really by acknowledging the countries that we are born in, like we are South Africa, and how our identities are distinct, and how our differences are not meant to divide us.
Agreed.
Thank you for joining us on Outspoken Owls. That was surely a hoot. Join us next time.